Since I previously did a Barry Windsor-Smith video very recently, I thought I might as well go and do a video on his 80s work on Machine Man. I know that it's technically, so the first three issues are technically penciled by Herb Trimpe, but Barry Windsor-Smith did finishes on it. He did the inks and he did the color work on it. So when we previously did Rune, we saw him pretty much at his apex, at his highest point. I think for his color, even though Weapon X I think may have been slightly better in certain ways, and I think it was a couple of years before Rune, if I'm correct. But this book kind of shows him grow beyond the early Conan stuff that we looked at. I don't have like the later issues of his Conan work where he kind of settled in and really was kind of in a place where he was very comfortable with his artwork. Or maybe he wasn't being told that you have to draw like Kirby. Machine Man's an interesting one because it sort of is this futuristic world. Actually, it's supposed to take place, I believe, in 2020, but it came out in 1984, and this was sort of the polar opposite of Conan, which is pretty interesting. So I'm gonna go through the Herb Trimpe stuff and kind of, he did the breakdowns. I don't know if that means the pencils, and then Barry Windsor-Smith did the finishes, or if Herb Trimpe was just, really tightly penciling it. I'm not sure, but you can definitely see some Barry Windsor-Smith feel in this work, obviously, because he's doing the finishes. So we start out with this. I like to look at Barry Windsor-Smith draw the figure. I think that's where he's the strongest. But um, again, this is Herb Trimpe, but I think the figure is where he really shines. So we're just gonna kind of quickly go through this. I mean, we're at this factory, and then we get here, and then we see these figures. And I'm not very familiar with Herb Trimpe's work, but I definitely feel, excuse me, I definitely feel some Barry Windsor-Smith in this. And I mean the color, it it now obviously this is on newsprint, and it's not gonna pop as much as the Rune stuff, which was on glossy paper, but you definitely still have that purplish feel to Barry Windsor-Smith's work in the colors area. And man, his colors were, like I said in the Rune video, I mean, I don't think anybody did color better than him. I honestly, it's very difficult when it comes to my favorite comic book artists. He's definitely up there. Eventually, I am going to do a video on my favorite comic book artists, but man, his work is just unbelievable. And again, I know he's doing finishes here, and Herb Trimpe's probably doing the pencils. We are going to look at the last issue. Oop. We're going to look at the last issue at some point in this video, because this is completely Barry Windsor-Smith. So anyways, so we're just going to kind of go through this stuff really quick. The figure work is amazing. I mean, I'm a big fan of the figure. More so, unless you get something like a, like a cyberpunk or something like that kind of genre, the the architecture and the backgrounds are not really that important to me unless I see something that's just unbelievable. But I like, for instance, this street view is really interesting. I really like that street view. Um, but yeah, man, I mean, it's just like you see this Barry Windsor-Smith finishes, and he just really polishes it up beautifully. I love this panel right here, this splash page. Very cool. Man, that color is amazing. Even on newsprint, you know, it's really great. And I think it's a great series. I mean, the story again. I buy I buy some comic books for the story, and then I buy some comic books for the artwork. And this is definitely a book that I bought for the artwork. The storyline's okay. You know, it's just like Machine Man gets taken by these people. You know, they find him in this like cargo, like this box, and then you know, he comes back or he comes in the future or whatever, and then he has an enemy, and they're basically trying to get Machine Man back. But anyways, I mean, the storyline is very simple. Um, that's really cool, Jim Starlin. But anyways, I'm just gonna do a quick run through issue 2. Kind of point out the stuff that looks great. I mean, that is a great shot. That is a great. It's a 1 point perspective, but it looks amazing. I mean, it's literally just following that point there, but you have this curve, this motion of this vehicle. I mean, some really interesting pages here. Um, Again, the figure work is amazing. I mean, it's a little bit stiff here, but you know, no, I mean, not a big deal. The explosions look great. I mean, that color with that explosion looks great. Barry Windsor-Smith really figured out how to do explosions in color very, very well. I love these panels that are just these solid backgrounds. It reminds me of Kirby. It's something that Kirby did a lot, at least to my knowledge. Kirby, I mean, I'm sure there are other artists who did it, but, you know, Kirby is the one that I think of. That face, man, that face is amazing. The emotion on that face. And the one thing I also noticed about this book is the action is really interesting, too. I mean, it really is well plotted out. Herb Trimpe, man, his plotting is great. And I'm sure Barry Windsor-Smith learned a lot from working with him. But man, look at the action, the dynamic movement of that leg and that robot. Amazing. I mean, I look at a lot of these books from artistic standpoints because right now, I mean, I'm learning to become a better artist, so I look at this artwork and I look at these finishes and I look at the dynamism and I look at the perspective. And man, I mean, like that's I mean, something like that, you look at a panel like that and you go, well, it's just, you know, this vehicle going through water. I mean, that's really cool. You know, if you look at it from an artistic standpoint. Man, look at that. I mean, look at that reaction to the needle going in, the movement through that panel, you know, just really awesome. It kind of reminds me of like Miller, of like Frank Miller, something Frank Miller would have done in Dark Knight Returns. Again, we got some great color, great facial expressions. You know, she's trying to get information, so she's going to torture uh, this woman, and then she's like, okay, let's cool it down. We need her to be alive to give us information. And of course, she escapes. Yeah. And I will say one thing. Um, at least in Weapon X, I don't know how much Barry Windsor-Smith had to do with this, but Barry Windsor-Smith knows how to do walking through snow wonderfully. Again, it's probably Herb Trimpe, but you know, yeah. I mean that figure work and that's such an interesting composition. You know, your eye is following all these characters, and then you have this group of characters just in this trap, and then of course Iron Man, but it's not Tony Stark. It's Iron Man in the future, 2020 to be exact. So yeah. All right, and then we're just gonna look at 3, and then I'm gonna jump into 4, because 4 is the one I really want to look at. I know this video is a little long, but we'll go through it pretty quickly. Again, man, this series, the opening panels, the opening splash pages, absolutely amazing. There's definitely a Barry Windsor-Smith feel to that, for sure. Um, man, I mean, look at the movement. Man, I mean, this stuff still looks great, you know, on newsprint. I don't know if they ever did a graphic novel of this because it's honestly a cheap series that you can get your hands on. It's not a well-known character or character that people really give a shit about. I think it's a Kirby character originally, but yeah, man, I mean, it's just that definitely feels like a Barry Windsor-Smith face for sure. I mean, the eyes are not perfect; they're a little close together, but man, look great, absolutely amazing. I mean, look at that room. That room's great. It feels so alive, you know. Man, that color palette. He wasn't going like over the, you know, like he wasn't going completely into the color palette, but he was kind of getting there. He's still trying to figure himself out. That's why I think I like this series so much, is because there's every series. Conan's a series where Barry Windsor Smith is kind of getting himself together with his anatomy and with his you know kind of like early artistic work, and then this feels like a series where he's kind of getting comfortable with his color. And then you get to Weapon X, and it's kind of like everything is combined now. The color is down perfectly, the art is done perfectly, the anatomy is done perfectly, the form, the gesture is all done perfectly, the inking is done perfectly. And this is kind of, you know, Barry Windsor Smith is learning the process. Even though, I mean, I think at this point he was probably in the industry probably for, God, I don't even know how long. But, you know, I feel like he was just a penciler before this, but I'm not entirely sure. But anyways, that action, that movement of Iron Man, amazing, absolutely amazing. So I think at this point, Barry Windsor Smith. No, it was still Herb Trimpe doing the breakdowns. But yeah, I mean, look at that panel. That panel's amazing. Yeah. What a great series. All right, so now we're gonna get to the point. Now we're at the point where it's just Barry Windsor Smith. No more Herb Trimpe. It's Tom DeFalco, and then Barry Windsor Smith doing everything. So, man, I love that figure. I absolutely love that figure. Um, and I don't see that much of a difference in the styles. There's a slight difference actually now that I look at it. But man, those are the deltoids going into that bicep. Man, that's, and the way he draws vehicles. You know, you got this vehicle coming at you. It's just so, man, unbelievable. Man, look at that top-down view of that city. And then Machine Man is flying over it. Kind of reminds you of like something like Mobius would do. Very Mobius-like. I love that panel too. Man, there's something about Barry Windsor Smith. He's just so good at drawing pictures of guys being connected to tubes, you know, and wires. I think he's the best tube wire guy or guy connected to tubes and wire artist possibly of all time. Man. I wish there was a little bit more, you know, of a feel to that. It feels a little stiff, but still looks great. Man, those eyes. Barry Windsor Smith, man, knew how to draw eyes so well. And those explosions, the color just explodes with color. And the rain. I don't think his rain is as good as James O'Barr. But man, is it good. It's great. And that color. I love the way he draws vehicles. I mean, that stuff is really difficult to draw. And Barry just makes it seem like it's so simple. I wonder how long it took him to do that panel and what the turnaround time was for this series. Man, look at that. Look at that action. I mean, I mean, the movement of Iron Man punching him, you know, punching Machine Man right in the face. I mean, you really did need to bring Barry Windsor Smith in to kind of put the finish to this because all the action is in here. These first three issues are a little bit boring. And then you're finally getting this point where it's like, oh man, we got the action finally, and I think that we have the better artist. But you see, there's things like his body looks a little too long, but it works. The torso looks a little too long, but it works. Barry Windsor-Smith to me was never perfectionist. But man, he's a draftsman. He definitely was a draftsman, or is a draftsman. I talk about him like he's dead. He's still alive. I think I did that in the last video too. Um, but yeah, man. I mean, he's just. I mean, that movement of that arm, his anatomy is spot on. The twisting, man. I go nuts over this, and I just love that forearm. Look at that. Look at that. That very foreshortened. Man, that's a great panel. Machine Man coming towards you. Awesome. That punch, man. There's so much power in that punch. Oh man, look at that. Look at that panel. Man, I can just look at these pages forever. That leg is weird. It's like this weird long leg, but it works. It works. I mean, that's the reason why I think I enjoy Barry Windsor-Smith's art so much, is because there's a lot of imperfections, but they work. It reminds me a lot of Kirby. I feel like Barry Windsor-Smith is like Kirby if Kirby had time. Had more time, wasn't doing 5 books a month. Because he's got a lot of Kirby elements to him. These long legs, and they're not overly defined. But I feel like Weapon X, he starts to kind of define things more. Kind of defines the muscles more. Man, look at that panel. That's a great panel. And then you have a lot of these solid colors. Very Kirby-like. We got John Romita Jr. as Marvel Hunk of the Month. Hell yeah. Um, but yeah, I just love how he draws all that, all those bits and bobs inside of his head, like the machinery. I mean, that's forms on top of forms, but he makes it look so easy. That's difficult to draw. That's very difficult to draw, especially at that. I know he's probably working at 11 by 17, but still, it's difficult to draw with all those forms overlapping one another. I mean, these are a lot of great panels. I mean, the camera moving out. Comic looks great. Absolutely looks great. So yeah, that's Machine Man. Uh, I mean, Barry Windsor-Smith is almost at the point where he's ready for Weapon X. But because I believe Weapon X, I don't remember the exact year that Weapon X came out. I know it had to have come out before 1984. Or I mean, I'm sorry, not before, after 1984. Because this came out in 85. It was January 85. I can't remember the exact year that Weapon X came out, but yeah, I mean, there's so many great. I mean, this action is amazing. And these solid colors, these Kirby-like solid colors. So, yeah. Well, that's Machine Man. I would advise anybody to get it. It's unbelievably cheap. I don't know if there's a graphic novel version of it, but if you really love Barry Windsor-Smith's art, and also if you have any interest in drawing, or even just like the idea of looking at, how, like, trying to understand how it's done, man, Barry Windsor-Smith is absolutely the master. I was actually going through Rune recently, and I was looking at a panel where the main vampire character was just in this unbelievably weird position, and I just sat there trying to figure out how to draw it for the longest time, and I was just like, well, let me take a break. And then I never went back again to try to draw it, because man, Barry Windsor-Smith could draw the figure in any foreshortened position imaginable. And I think his years and years and years, well, not years, but his 2 years of doing, I shouldn't say years and years, his 2 years of doing Conan taught him a lot. So, and I truly do believe that. So, anyways, that's cool. That is a, that seems very difficult to draw. I guess you could turn the page, but still. Anyways, all right.